I have a lot of memories of my first couple of weeks living with Scooby. It was a transitional time for me, so parts of it are really clear in my memory. One thing that stands out is the first time that I made a big meal after having moved in. You see, he'd been up for a couple of days doing amphetamines, and he kind of ran out, and I believe he found a small amount of his drug of choice, heroin, at the end of his run, so he slept for like 2 or 3 days, just pretty much straight. I decided to make up a big meal for whenever he woke up because I was going to have the opportunity to go to canteen and spend my money. You've heard that hunger is the best seasoning. I like to cook, and I figured making a nice meal for somebody who hadn't eaten for about 2 days and was just realizing that he was actually starving was going to be kind of like playing poker with a stacked deck. Anyone who's cooked with not enough space and not enough materials for a bunch of people knows that the strategy is always pretty much the same. You make one big bowl of some kind of primary food item, like noodles or spaghetti, for instance, and then another bowl of something to go on top of it, like a sauce. In prison, that's a spread. What you do is you make a big bowl of soups and chips and beans and meal pouches and spices and whatever you think should go in the bowl, and then you put it over chips, generally, or chips over it. I like to cook, and I took my spreads seriously. I was perfectly willing to spend an hour and a half slicing and seasoning, and then another hour after that, saucing and simmering, if that was what it took to get a meal to come out just right. Because you have that kind of time. There's no problem with spending 3 hours on a big meal for you and your friends. I went to the canteen, and it took a couple of hours to get all of the stuff that I wanted to get. Your money is there electronically on the computer, and you just wait in line until you make your way up to the window, and then inside they have all of the food items. You hand in your list of the things that you want to buy at the beginning of the day, and they have it all ready for you. They just scan everything and slide it out the window, and then you sign a piece of paper saying that you got everything you asked for and that you want them to take that amount of money off your books. Whenever I came home, Scooby was out like a brick, which is about what I would have expected, and I started cooking. It was hours later before he started stirring, and his timing was perfect. I'd expected him to be hungry when he woke up because I knew he hadn't eaten in literal days. But I also knew he was going to be hungry whenever he woke up because he woke up about a half hour after I started simmering off the sauce on my 2 hot pots full of real good meat and cheese and spices that I needed to get the water off of. This is in a small cell, and these things have been boiling for about a half hour, so I assure you it smelled like a little slice of heaven in there. It was, gosh, I think a year later, 9 months, that Scooby and I and our neighbor, the shot caller, Stu, were talking about how good this meal was that I had made. You see, I hadn't just cooked for Scooby and I cooked for Stu and his cellie, and then just a couple of cells down, because Stu and his cellie were our direct neighbors, just a couple of cells down, there was, it was Gray Hair, who was an old-timer. He was in, 134? And I can't remember his cellie's name, but I think whenever his cellie paroled, 2 years later, Powder moved into that cell, 134, there in 3 block on B Yard. Anybody who watches stories written by a current prisoner is going to know who Powder is. He and I were housed together. We weren't close, but we did eat meals regularly and talk quite a bit. If you're not familiar with the show Stories Written by a Current Prisoner, you may want to consider checking it out. It's gritty, but it does provide a real and accurate presentation of what some aspects of prison life are like. I shared this meal with everybody, and I have to admit that it wasn't entirely generous, it wasn't entirely selfless. I had a hidden agenda. Money was okay for me. I don't mean I was rich and I could waste money, and nobody should waste money. But I mean that I had enough that I could feed myself and the people around me while I was incarcerated without it being a real hardship most of the time. And I had time. I mean, hours and hours. You can spend it studying or playing cards or cooking or whatever you want to do, but time is something you have when you're locked up. So I decided to use those things and essentially make a good impression on my new cellie and my new neighbors and the guys down the tier a little bit. All I was before that was Blanky's cellie or Scooby's cellie, or maybe in the best case scenario I was that guy who'd killed a pedophile and actually had the paperwork to prove it. But I certainly couldn't use that to define myself. You run around and the only thing anybody knows about you is you're the guy that killed a pedophile, and you'd better believe that you're going to get yourself in trouble. Someone's going to suggest that maybe you should handle the next one. I didn't want to walk around seeming like a badass. I didn't want to pretend like I was a badass. It's a good way to get yourself killed, frankly. So I was the guy who could cook, and that was a fine way to do things. They sold little clear totes in packages at High Desert, and I had, I think, 3 of them just filled with spices, and not just garlic and salt and pepper, but every stinking thing that I could possibly use in a meal. It's funny because I'm pretty sure that if you'd asked Scooby, he would have said that he would have rather gotten some heroin than a nice meal that day. He was a heroin addict. What's more fun than heroin to a heroin addict? But I'm pretty confident he had a better time with me and the other fellows eating this big meal than he would have if I just went out and got him a shot from the dope man. I know it seems like a bit much. I mean, a heroin addict is what they want to do, but I'm confident that no matter how good the dope was that we'd gotten him, $30 wasn't going to have him talking about it 9 months later. He would have forgotten about it. It's just drugs. He did them all the time. That meal and the afternoon that the 6 of us spent kind of sitting around and talking, eating, playing cards, it was a pretty good day, and I know he had more fun doing that than he would have doing anything else. But that's the funny thing, is that the things that we want aren't always the things that'll make us happy, always the things that'll be fun. We like to think that we're good judges of the things that'll make us happy, but in reality, as I look back at my life, and I've had a lot of opportunity to look back at my life, most of the times that my quality of life really improved, that I became a happier person, a more fulfilled person, it wasn't from getting the things that I wanted, that I was trying to get. It was from finding something that I didn't know that I needed and having it available to me in my life. So the next time that you're working so hard and you're pushing to get that little rung on the ladder up higher, to get that thing that you want, you've worked so hard for, don't stop working. Don't stop reaching for it. But do take a moment, a minute, 10, whatever time you have, and consider the possibility that there are other things in your life that you haven't even considered that you need that will also make you happy and fulfilled. Because if you get the things that you want, the easy things, the drugs and the money and the women or whatever it is that makes you happy, without trying to grow and find things that make you better, in the final analysis, all you are is empty. You won't be happy, you'll be unfulfilled.